areas to touch on, but I know I'm not going to cover everything. So uh, feel free to elaborate on some things that I don't get to hit on
Mm.
in the panel discussion.
Dr. Crabtree, Diane is here with me today as well. She sends her hellos.
Tell her I said hello. I miss you all.
It looks like we have a few attendees logging on. Do you all think it's okay to give maybe until 3:05 for others to get logged on? Perfect.
Is there any just because I see like Gia, like some people have moderator, like do you want us to rename ourselves in any particular way?
That would be great if you guys don't mind putting, like if you're a panelist, putting panelist just for clarity. That would be awesome.
Okay, is it okay with everyone if I go ahead and get started?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I know that we have a few attendees on here, but we will also be having some that are watching from the YouTube channel. So thank you all for joining and welcome to the 2025 Job Search Series. As we mentioned, today's session will be recorded and on the TCAN YouTube channel, and we will send out the links to all of the registrants. You can also check out previous videos on the YouTube. If you have not already registered at the QR code here to the right, you can also register for future sessions. So if you'll go to the next slide for me. Today we will be discussing the academic practice job search. And I am honored to introduce for our speaker today, Dr. Cindy Crabtree, who is coming to us from the University of Louisville. You can see everything here. Dr. Crabtree went to medical school at the Kentucky College of Osteopathic Medicine with her residency and fellowship at the University of Louisville. She is currently at Norton Children's Hospital as well as the University of Louisville, and is not only an associate professor of pediatrics, the neonatal and perinatal medicine fellowship director, but also the POCUS program co-director and the director of career development for neonatology. And I can attest that Dr. Crabtree is a wonderful resource and loves to help guide residents and fellows and students along their path into neonatology. So we're very excited to have her today. Her email address is listed here. So just to run how things will work, Dr. Crabtree will speak to us first, and then we will introduce our panelists and move into some question and answer. So if you think of questions along the way, you can just go ahead and type those into the chat or the Q&A, and we will work on getting those answered. So Dr. Crabtree, if you want to take it away, that would be great.
Thanks, Julie. I appreciate that, and really appreciate the invitation from TCAN, and have loved this job search series. I think it's really a nice resource, and have had fellows personally go back and watch some of these videos. And so I think it provides an additional layer that sometimes we're not able to get at during training, or you need it at various points during your training. And so some of maybe your All Fellows curriculum don't cover some of these things right at the right time. And so TCAN and the YouTube channel is a really nice resource for kind of looking back on some of these previous speakers. So again, thank you for the welcome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Does that look appropriate for you all?
Might
Okay.
want to swap displays.
I'm sorry, what was that?
It is in presenter mode, so we can see the notes as well.
Oh, well, hello, that's who I am. How about
Yeah.
good?
Perfect.
Fantastic. Well, again, welcome. As Julie mentioned, I'm the program director here at University of Louisville, and I have a specific interest in career developing and an evolving interest in coaching. And so this has been something that's passion of mine as I help to guide a lot of our fellows along this path. But then too, as I've kind of evolved into helping junior faculty as well. And so it's great to be a part of this series, and I look forward to diving in. I will give a disclaimer that this is a really big topic with a lot of intricacies because, and that's probably where the anxiety comes with this process is sometimes a lot of the fine details vary from institution to institution. And so that's what makes it great that we have a lot of panelists here that can speak to their experiences and speak to some of those intricacies that they have at their institution or that maybe they've experienced personally as they walked this road, just like you are getting ready to do. So I have no relevant financial relationships or conflicts of interest to disclose. And today, our objectives are going to be to really understand the key steps in the academic job search and strategies for you to navigate this process with confidence, explore how you can define and communicate your academic value, which I think is really, really important and kind of sets apart this process in the academic job search. Learn approaches to prepare and succeed in the job interview, and then identify some ways to evaluate institutional culture, mentorship, and personally for you, long-term fit at the places that you're either looking to apply to and then interview and potentially accept a position. I'll make note, this is a publication that actually collected data on this exact job search series by Dias et al. And they went back and basically, as a part of this 7-part virtual job search series that were developed for you all, fellows and early career neonatologists, they surveyed participants. And from this, the data shows that a lot of fellows start with pretty low confidence in a lot of the key job search components. And less than 25% felt confident in navigating the job search or understanding junior faculty roles. And this underscores kind of why we're here today and why we continue this job search series. The good news, though, is that equipped with the right tools and the right information, that we can minimize at least the stress of the unknown and help you navigate this process a little bit easier. These are just some of the graphs or tables, data tables pulled from this paper that just talk about the majority of survey respondents felt somewhat or very unknowledgeable in all of these areas, including roles and responsibilities of an academic job, the timeline, the typical starting salaries, and contract negotiation. In addition, low perceived confidence by respondents in preparing a CV, a cover letter, and then marketing yourself. And so what about you? The participants of this job search series, you submitted questions that basically asked what you wanted to get, questions you wanted to ask for this series. And so now I want you all to kind of take a minute to reflect on what your top questions are. I have a list of them that you all submitted. But if for some reason some of these things we don't go through as you write down your questions, maybe we can answer them from the panelists, or if I'm not able to touch on, because there were quite a few questions that were submitted, that we can make sure we work to get those answered in the panel discussion. And so I did take all of those questions and did a little bit of a thematic analysis, which is not perfect, but really tried to hone in on key themes of questions in big categories that we'll kind of talk through here in a minute, and how those relate back to the objectives for today. And so back to those objectives, and the key things that I kind of pulled out of the questions were really understanding the process, how you look for a job, and the timeline, translating your training and experience. So really getting at that academic value, the strategy and positioning yourself as a competitive candidate that lands the job, and then figuring out culture and fit. And so these are kind of some of the questions that were asked. I paraphrased a bit, but really insight that I get from this personally is that the academic job search for you feels overwhelming due to its unstandardized timelines, varying institutional expectations, and then the perceived by you high stakes of that first position decision making. And then insights from this kind of key theme were that, it reflects a lot of uncertainty by trainees and early career neos around how to package and position yourself based on your training and your experiences, those strengths. And then the strategy and positioning piece reflects a need to project confidence and clarity while navigating the ambiguity and the competition and your perception of that. And then culture and fit, really insight that I gained from some of your questions were that, the subjective aspects of fit, kind of hard things you can't tangibly put into a box. like team dynamics, leadership style, burnout risk at a various institution based on the demands, and then what personal support you might get at that institution specifically. And so before we kind of dive into this, I'm going to talk about a couple of key terms, and I do apologize if some of you all know these already. But when I speak sometimes with fellows, and then as we even sometimes have fellows or early career faculty that come in and interview, but mainly fellows, some of these terminology are a little foreign. You may have heard your attendings talk about this. You may have overheard a conversation in a meeting, or someone talk about these kinds of things, but it's really helpful just to have some of this terminology in your mind, so that you're not hearing this for the first time or confused when you're at a job interview and sitting with your potential future chief and you start discussing things like FTE and protected time. And so briefly, as you can see here, you can reflect back on these slides and this potentially before going out, but understanding what full time equivalent is. And it's a measure of your workload. You'll hear people say, I'm a 1.0. That's a bummer, but you're 0.8, you're 0.7, you have point this for that. And that basically is a measure of your workload in specific hours. Now, I'm not going to touch the point that various institutions determine what hours mean a 1.0. That's way out of this realm or way out of this topic of conversation. But it just depends on what your full-time equivalent is. And so that's 1.0. And then you have protected time that can come off of that 1.0 that's designated as non-clinical time for, say, research, teaching, other things, administrative work. There is effort allocation that you may hear, that you can see here. And then some of us in various practices may have RVUs that they operate under, particularly those in the clinic. But that also tends to be popping up in units, that there are related relative value units that then can often be tied to compensation. Other terms like promotion, and that's advancement in academic rank based on accomplishment in scholarship, teaching, and service. You may hear things like tenure track and non-tenure track, which basically are ways that you achieve promotion, but they just have different requirements. And so it's nice to start to understand what those requirements are depending on your interest in your track and what you're going to be pursuing in your academic practice. You may hear us talk about job talks, as particularly in this presentation, and that's a formal presentation that you will give during your interview to showcase your expertise. And then another one that kind of pops up is an LOI or a letter of offer, and this just outlines the terms of employment and comes before the contract of a formal agreement. And so with all that out of the way, we'll get cracking on talking about the timeline and then some specific pieces of this to help kind of guide you along the way. And so most of this starts kind of right when you start fellowship, right? You're looking at career planning and development, and this is a lot of the mentorship that you're already doing and thinking about what it is you seeing yourself doing after fellowship. And that's hard right in the beginning, because you're exploring, you're developing your career, you're trying to figure out what your interests are. But just know that you've kind of already started this process. And then when the formal process takes place, just know that it can be a lengthy process that can take quite a bit of time, from when you start looking for jobs to applying, to doing screening interviews, to interviewing in person, receiving that LOI and contract. That can sometimes take quite a bit of time to happen. And so just knowing that off the get-go can hopefully take some anxiety off your plate as to why things aren't moving quicker. And so we'll kind of outline some major steps and then talk about those in a little bit more detail. And so like I said, that's step one in your early years of fellowship, where you're kind of doing some career planning and exploration. A lot of that hopefully tying back to your scholarship, but maybe not. Updating your CV. In year two, kind of in that December to June mark, you start to think about clarifying your professional and personal criteria for a job. refining your CV and maybe potentially starting to really draft a template cover letter that you can then start to individualize for various programs that you plan on applying to, and then just starting to test the waters and feel what's out there, what programs could you be interested in, making a list, so on and so forth. And I promise we're going to go into a lot more detail on all of these areas. In early of third year, I'm kind of starting the application process of working to apply to positions or reaching out, aka cold calling, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And then working to really network based on places that you have interest in. And we'll talk about that later as well. I try to put this in tangible steps because it always feels good for me to be able to check stuff off of my list of to-dos. But that next step comes likely a screening interview, which may be a phone or Zoom. And sometimes this is by a recruiter at first, which is really a brief, like, are you an actual person? And do we want to take the time to set up a meeting with someone from a search committee to deem, is it worth the investment to bring you in for an in-person interview? And so that may happen in one or two steps. And then along those same timelines fall an in-person interview. Now, there are times that interviews can go into January and beyond, depending on where you're at, but this is just kind of a rough estimate of the in-person interviews are likely in the fall and winter. Steps 6 through 8 are really your post-interview follow-up, your offer and negotiation, and acceptance and transition. And so let's dive a little deeper into some of these areas, and we'll kind of go from there. And so really this career planning and exploration piece, defining your areas of interest, identifying potential practice types, and discussing your goals with mentors, like I mentioned. These, really identifying applications, places for applications and ways to kind of search for jobs, maintaining your CV, and I'll have some links for you all on places to kind of look for jobs. It's a process that you potentially not navigated in a while, that there's not a bunch of boxes that you can check on a list that you submit and pay extra money to get more programs in. This is really like going to the pavement and looking for a job. So it feels like, but there are lots of resources out there. And during this time frame, like I mentioned, drafting that cover letter, that application process that I mentioned, and really, wanting to tailor that cover letter that you made. And some programs have a formal application process where these items can be uploaded. Some of them ask you to email. It sometimes can be formal versus informal. And really, during that period, that cover letter piece is really highlighting your fit, your interest, and the academic value that you bring. That in that screening interview that I mentioned, that, really the purpose of that is to assess mutual interests, clarify some logistics, prepare at that point to discuss your goals and interests and ask questions. And this kind of sets the stage for your level of professional maturity. So being professional, being prompt, kind, and follow up. And being kind to those who contact you from an administrative standpoint, because their input does matter as well. And then the in-person interviews are single day versus multi-day. You'll meet with faculty, division chief, hospital leaders. You may or may not give a job talk presentation, like I mentioned before. This may include lunches, tours, observation of rounds, and all in the hope of giving you the ability to assess team culture, get a gist of clinical scope, so on and so forth. Your job talk during the interview process is a really major opportunity to show your academic promise. It doesn't have to be research heavy, or it can. Oftentimes it does relate back to your current scholarly work. But it also can highlight other things like a clinical quality project, education work that you've done. But it does need to be prepared, polished, and as much as you can aligned with the institution's mission, so that your audience can get a sense of how you fit into the division. And then just an overview of this post-interview follow-up with sending thank you notes or emails to interviewers, and then clarifying any uncertainty, and then debriefing with your mentors to evaluate fit. And I'm again going to go into a lot more detail in some of these specific areas. The step 7 on the roadmap is the verbal offer, followed by that formal LOI, followed by a contract. And then once you've gotten to the step 8 and that transition, you want to notify all the programs of your decision, particularly if you've accepted an offer, you don't want to leave anyone else hanging. Because it's a small community, and you may end up looking for a job at that institution, and you don't want anyone recalling that you drug them along. And at that point, you'll begin all of the relocation planning. So let's take a closer look at what I like to say defines your joy of your academic work, your niche, your focus. And this is what helps you answer that question, which you're going to get is how are you going to utilize your academic FTE? And so what are the elements that you want to be a part of your long-term job? I like to call it the joy factor, but it's that additional part of your work. Is it in research? Is it in education? Is it in any of these other things that you see here? And this is not an all-inclusive list of everything because clinical niches can be a variety of things, but really start to hone in on what it is that you want to have a part of your long-term career. And likely a lot of you are already doing this or have it narrowed down or have some ideas because you're going to be asked, whether you're ready for it or not, what do you want to utilize your academic FTE for? And I want you to have a solid answer. And why do they ask? They want to gauge your professional maturity. They want to see potential group engagement. They want to be able to also gauge academic productivity and what you're going to utilize that time for. Why do you care? Well, because it's your joy factor, right? You don't want to do things that don't bring you joy. And sometimes, we have to do things to get our foot in the door. And so I'm living in a rosy land right now where you get to pick what it is you want to do. But sometimes there are things that you get involved in or you do because there's maybe not an opportunity to lead something at this point in time. But at least being transparent about those interests could create something by making that known. I want you to be able to try to you want your efforts to align with your interests. You want to maximize the amount of academic FTE you're given, and sometimes that's set from institution to institution on what you're allowed to come in at. Going back to that 1.0 discussion, some institutions have you come in at a base FTE for clinical time versus academic time. But if there is wiggle room to get more and you have a solid experience and you're bringing expertise to a group and you're filling a gap, you want to maximize the amount that you're given when you first come in. And then like anything promotion, right? You want to be set up for success when you go through the promotion process. And I know this is feels like not the time to be talking about this right now, but it is tied to your salary ultimately and your professional reward. And so joining a group where you get to incorporate your interests and your academic FTE so that you are productive from a scholarly standpoint means that you are able to go up for promotion on time, and that's tied back to salary and potentially more academic FTE. So what if you don't know? That's okay. It is okay if you don't know exactly, but that doesn't change the fact that someone's going to ask you, division chief and other faculty members who interview you. So having areas of interest that you have in mind, and also doing some investigation on the institutions that you're working at to see if you can self-identify gaps. You don't want to walk in there and say, hey, I see you don't do this, but potentially you can then start to see what opportunities lie at an institution you are going to be interviewing at and see how you can fit there in some areas that say you have a number of areas of interest. And so you're going to develop your academic value by identifying that joy factor and creating a vision for yourself. By doing this, you're going to show how your experiences in fellowship align back to your joy factor or your area of expertise, demonstrate ways that you're developing your expertise further or ways that you want to develop expertise later on into your early career. Tie this back if you can to the mission and vision of the division and hospital system. This is like you know, and the administrators particularly love this move, because they are always looking to how you could tie back to the mission and vision of the hospital. And then share your vision of how you want to be integrated into the division. And so I use this document that I'm going to show with my fellows and early career faculty to develop a strategic vision or a career vision, to kind of one document that ties everything into place. You don't have to utilize something like this. You just need to be thinking in this way to tell your story, showcase your expertise, highlight areas of your training that are applicable for your position, the mentorship you've had, the project pipelines that you have, scholarly work you've done, committee work, ways that you're going to come in and have promotion planning. And this is what the strategic vision looks like for our fellows and faculty. And it's kind of busy, and it might not be your specific cup of tea, but it kind of helps for us to have a meeting. And this is a lot of stuff to talk about, to kind of come to one place and figure out, how does all this tie in to an area of interest and an area of growing expertise that then I want to be able to use as a marketing tool to programs to show my academic value when I'm finishing fellowship and interviewing. And so this just kind of goes through areas and ways that tie back into your interest, that will showcase and highlight your degree of interest in this area, and things that you have done or plan to do to grow your area of expertise or niche, so to speak. And so now that you kind of have your area or areas that you want to showcase, now you ready, set, apply, right? And so that application approach. At this point, you're going to start thinking about, what do you want? What do you need? And that's basically your personal and professional alignment with the programs out there that have job openings. A lot of this is geographic located for you, maybe for family support, from a partner standpoint, or just pure, this is where you want to be. There may be kind of a trade-off with, is there a partner job package that you need to consider? Your partner is a physician as well, and exploring that. What type of unit you want to be in, clinical opportunities, academic opportunities and reputation that particularly become important when you are looking to grow yourself on the national front in some of these areas, and specifically with lab support and research funding and things along those lines. And then back to that niche specific or joy factor opportunities, if those are there. And those sometimes end up starting to become on second tier lists, but starting to make a list of areas and programs that you see yourself being interested in is a great first start. Specifically talking about research, because, and maybe some of our panelists can speak to this if there are specific questions, but depending on your level of research interest and where you see your career going, I think the institutional reputation and support and availability are really, really important if you see yourself operating at this level from a research standpoint, and really understanding what the institutional resources are for you, and the mentorship that someone can provide to help you get these things off the ground, if you're interested in this for your long-term career, this level. And so with that application approach, you kind of know that job availability will fluctuate based on your search criteria and what a division might need from year to year. And so considering a tiered approach to number 1 tier, number 2 tier programs, or A, B, C list that you want to first apply to, and then kind of wave down based on what is available and what is out there. And like I've mentioned before, in this application approach, really doing your homework as you've identified some of those key programs that you're interested in, to then identify a connection. This is huge. So figuring out, do you know someone there? Do you have a connection there? Anything, maybe not in the division, in the Department of Pediatrics, beyond, in the city, some way to tie you to that program that shows you've got some engagement there, that could potentially affirm that you would be a candidate would be retained, I think that's really, really important. Try to network intentionally. And so you maybe at a meeting and you run into someone at an institution, really working to connect with them, and then leverage your own mentors and your program directors. And so, and I know that you will be having active conversations in the job search process with who knows who, where, and programs to apply. But I think this is also really important. And more often than not, division chiefs do reach out to program directors and talk to us based off of our letters. Very often I get contacted for a personal phone conversation. And so if your program director is not in the loop with where you're interviewing and your interest and what you're bringing and that story you're telling to the institution about what you can bring, there may be mixed messages that are sent. So keep your program director in the loop, as well as your mentors. And then, like I've always said, and I'll say this time and time again, that professionalism really does matter. Timeliness, and then proper and kind communication with all staff and faculty members throughout this process. And so finding a job, there are recruitment emails, newsletters, the back of the journals that list jobs, job listings through the AAP in the section, going to conferences and visiting exhibit halls that have hospital systems there that are advertising for jobs, asking through mentors and faculty based on that list, that kind of tiered list that you made. And then the infamous and scary to most is the cold calling, that sometimes you end up needing to do to kind of get your foot in the door at some various places and get your name out there. And so this is a list and links. This is not exhaustive. There are lots of things out there, and some of these are more private practice based, but just know there are a number of listservs and newsletters and links that you can sign up for to receive emails about job postings. I will put a little bit of a disclaimer here that you then tend to get on the list of people. And so you just have to balance that with how many times you want to get bothered with emails and things like that, and how much personal information you put out there, because then you can continue to get contacted for the rest of your life, which you will at any point for locums positions and jobs in places that are locations that are a little less desirable to be. And we will, like I said, share these slides with you all. So reaching out for a job reaching out without a job posting. So the infamous cold call. And more often than not, this is not you calling, this is an email that is sent directly to the division chief that provides, expresses your interest in a position at their institution. You provide a CV and your tailored cover letter that's specific, and then ask for a conversation that potentially to have to really just get your name out there, because there are times that the beginning of interview season, there are not job openings, and then things change. People switch jobs, positions open, retirements occur. Usually this is known when the budget is set for each academic for each division, and usually that's set kind of in July moving forward, but sometimes that could change. And so if you are on, the brain of a division chief and then a job opening comes up and they say, I remember this fellow reached out to me, that was pretty brave, and now we have a job positioning, I'm going to have the search committee reach out to them. So speaking of search committees, and so how do search committees screen, and what does this look like? So you've applied or cold called, you've gotten on someone's radar, and you maybe have gone through the screening process or getting ready to go through the screening process. They're going to review your CV and cover letter and anything that you provided in your application. A lot of places, and we do this, will do a reputation check. We're going to look online, we're going to look at social media, we're going to, if we know people, we're going to ask around, and there are certain people in search committees that this is their role. And so just a professional disclaimer there, to make sure that whatever you have out there is professional and appropriate. And then that brief screening phone call I mentioned, and then based on that, there will be a Zoom meeting with likely a committee search committee director or lead, or a faculty member from that search committee that then comes back to the committee and decides whether they want to pursue with an in-person interview offer. Like I mentioned before, that's typically 1 to 2 days of meetings with faculty, the division chief, leadership, hospital administration. This includes dinner, likely the night before with members of the division or the search committee, your job talk, like I mentioned, and then a tour of the city, which may or may not involve realtor, to kind of, particularly if you're not familiar with an area. And this looks different from institution to institution. And some institutions offer travel and accommodations that are covered. And so being able to clarify that, and that's an okay question to ask so that you can prepare for travel and things of that nature, so that you don't book something when someone is going to be reaching out to you to book it for you. And so you've got an interview, you've set everything up, so let's get interview ready. And so interviewing for your first job. This is a crucial part of your job search, obviously. This is your in-person opportunity to kind of seal the deal, right? And if you prepare, you're going to build yourself in confidence and you're going to enhance your performance on the day of. And so here's a couple of strategies to try to do that. Know the institution as much as you can. There's so much online and available that you can look up that you should prepare a little dossier for the institution on things that they have going on there, who people are, that truly shows that you are engaged and interested in this institution. You truly see yourself there. Investigate the division chief. What does she do? What areas of interest from a research standpoint? Faculty members, what are their areas of interest, research, clinical expertise? Find that connection there, someone that you know, someone that can vouch for you, that can pull in that engagement piece. Look up their mission and vision statements. Work to integrate that into how you see yourself fitting into the division, and then identify possible gaps in a professional way that you could fill, or areas that you could supplement with your area of interest. Look at the fellowship program, what they're doing. Supplementing education and helping a fellowship program become more competitive, particularly as there are fewer candidates kind of in the pipeline, is really huge. So if there's a way that you can, in your junior faculty role, supplement the fellowship program, I think that's also a really nice selling point. And then prepare stories or conversation starters that show alignment with all of these various things. Prepare, in ways that you can show engagement and productivity. Find ways to weave in that strategic vision or joy. Again, even if you've sent a CV early, have an updated CV with you, because various things may have changed from that process. And so being able to provide that if you're asked. Review what's on your CV. You do not want to be asked about something on your CV and not be able to talk about it. That will really put your foot in your mouth and really question your integrity a bit. And so review your research projects, your publication, anything listed on your CV, so that when asked, you can confidently discuss it. Your job talk preparation. In advance, you need to clarify the IT needs. You do not need stress on the day of that your computer won't hook up, you don't have it on the right format, you can't get things working. You don't need that stress when you're preparing to give a presentation in front of potential colleagues and your division chief. And so clarify IT needs in advance. Save your slides in multiple formats: email, thumb drive, desktop, all the things, and be prepared for no presenter view, just in case that's not there. Bring necessary adapters, particularly if you plan to use an Apple device. Have your presentation reviewed by a mentor, and really refresh your literature review on the topic beforehand, and identify if there are experts on your topic in the audience, what their maybe potential stance could be on what you're presenting, and maybe even reference something that ties into someone that's maybe potentially researched something similar, to kind of pull that in as a little nod to them in your research presentation. On the interview day, be punctual, professionally dressed. Some of this goes without saying. Expect to meet with physicians, potentially nurses, administrators. Observe practice dynamics, communication, and rounding culture. All these things that you kind of want to be picking up on the interview day while you're there. A couple of do's and don'ts before we move into what makes you a great fit for them and them a great fit for you is prepare, like I mentioned. Be positive, be personal, emphasize your goals, see yourself as a faculty member, a future faculty member. This is kind of hard as you come in as a fellow, you kind of feel like a fellow, but try to put yourself in the shoes of a future faculty member and carry the confidence like that. There are don'ts about things you just don't want to discuss. That is common sense, hopefully. And then, one thing I will say is really be, don't be critical of your past experiences or your current institution. You never know who knows somebody, and then it just can put a bad taste in your future practice's mouth. And so keep those thoughts and feelings to yourself on the interview day. So what makes you a great fit? I call this kind of the division chief wish list. So are you going to be engaged? Are you going to be productive? And do you align with the division's and institution's mission? And so this is what the division chief is really going to be trying to get at and understand from a fit perspective. Anyone that interacts with you is going to be trying to gauge your potential for academic productivity, what your scholarly focus is going to be, what your clinical contributions are going to be. If you have presence in any local or regional national forums yet, and not that you necessarily need to have that, but it's always a bonus if you do, and something that will be talked about, like they're already involved in X, Y, and Z, or have a foot in the door here. What your long-term engagement potentially will be, the cultural fit, your retention potential, and then what specific need you can help fill. And this goes back to your professional value, and making sure you're able to showcase those long-term goals. You're able to allow those interviewing you to see your clear plan for academic contributions and that your potential is worth the investment. There's also a big degree of personality and fit. Are you enthusiastic? Do your strengths and strengths fit with their needs? Can you balance confidence and humility? And a lot of this is really hard to gauge in the interview process, but every now and then these things will sneak out. And so just being mindful that these are things that divisions, faculty members will be looking for. Can you demonstrate adaptability? And in the end, are you someone that they can see themselves working with? And these are questions, and I won't belabor these just for time, but that you can reference before that potentially you can be asked of, and just some things that you should think about and reflect on, so that if you're asked, how would your colleagues describe you, or how do you handle conflict, that you kind of have a rehearsed answer, because you're going to be nervous the day of, and so have at least some guide of what you're going to follow. And so what makes them a great fit for you? Because yes, you are needing a job, you're wanting an opportunity, but you also want to see if you have the ability to, and you should, to make sure that it is the place you're going is going to be a good fit for you. And I will pause that many of us can say that their first job isn't their last job, right? And so, but you want your first job out, the attempt to be a good fit, so that early career growth for you is going to be productive is really important. And so, to be able to gauge fit, you really need to try to understand the academic environment there at a various institution. And so the tough part here is that institutions vary and differ so much. I don't think, and we can all agree, no place is exactly the same. And so asking lots of questions, learning about how career development is supported, understanding expectations for promotion and what the scholarship opportunities are, digging into the culture and values of an institution, attempt to spend time with some junior faculty, and then ask about expected growth or things that they see on the horizon for their division or their hospital system. Work to gauge group culture. that is a key predictor, that cultural fit of job satisfaction and retention. And I think that it's really central to being productive in your group. And so, we all know what collegiality is, and really why it matters. And you can kind of see all of this here, is that you want to be in a place that appreciates a diverse skill set, whatever it is that you're bringing to the table, because you're joining a team, not just taking a job. And so practices evolve, but strong relationships will weather change, and there will always be change no matter where you land. And so I think that is really important, although it is also really hard to gauge on the interview day. So again, having a connection somehow there to help you elucidate some of these things is very helpful. You want to understand the practice structure, which hopefully you will get on the interview day of, but asking about schedules, understanding service expectations, assessing time for distribution for research, education, clinical work, kind of understanding what the structure is of the practice and what your expectations are going to be. And there are challenges in academic life. And so how does this group you're interviewing with balance all of the demands, navigating various policies, avoiding burnout, and managing their personal and professional commitments. And so it's kind of hard to sometimes outright ask some of these questions, but really think about ways and when things come up that you can kind of get at checking some of these boxes to gauge how a group kind of balances some of the challenges in academia. Mentorship is really, really important. So ask about formal mentorship programs. Identify on your interview potential collaborators or mentors. And if there aren't there on interview day, see if you can set up a time to meet with them after the interview day to kind of make that connection. And then here are specific things that you can ask. And again, I won't go through all of these questions, and you can refer to these in the slide deck later on various questions that you can ask a group to kind of gauge some of that fit. And so as I'm kind of rounding out, what now? So you want to keep the momentum going. You want to be not there one day and gone the next, right? And so you finish your interview, you want to send thank you emails or notes to everyone you interacted with. This includes administrative staff and even HR. You may have an HR lead that's kind of your navigator through the process, depending on your hospital system. And so keeping all those interactions positive and thanking them for their time. Because bringing you in for an in-person interview is a lot of time and investment, money as well. And so you want to make sure that you thank them. I will say, in the era of lots of faculty members being virtual and remote, sometimes handwritten notes get to where they need to go, sometimes they don't. And so it gauging kind of maybe asking the HR connection or someone in the administrative staff on a preferred way for the faculty to receive, but you can't go wrong with emails. And this is going to demonstrate your continued interest by following up. You also want to try to continue, like I mentioned before, if you see certain members of division out at a conference, reach out to those connections and ask your program director or mentors to kind of help bridge that contact, and then respond promptly to all communications, and be timely and enthusiastic. Your offer and decision making, which this is a little bit beyond this scope, and there are going to be a session on negotiations and salaries and things like that in subsequent job search panels. But often you get a verbal offer followed by the LOI and then a contract. You want to be clear to them about your decision timeline, and then ask about theirs. And that's okay to ask. Don't accept multiple offers as placeholders. This is really frowned upon, just because of that, going back to if you accept an offer, an LOI or a verbal offer, and then you end up going with something else. That's really unprofessional. Think about in those offers beyond the salary, some of these other things we've kind of already talked about, what your protected time will be, administrative responsibilities and expectation, the clinical coverage, and then the opportunities that you have for growth. You know, salary discussions at this point can be sensitive and kind of uncomfortable, but you have to know that, and that will be included in a letter of intent. And think about it beyond the salary, kind of what your package includes, and that's some of these things that we've already talked about. And work with your mentors to understand the whole offer so that you can make a well-informed decision. Here's some key resources that you can utilize, and you can refer back to various reports on compensation models. Some of these require you to pay to get a report, but you can see salary ranges and various things for region and specialty. Just a brief little bit on contracts and legal considerations. And so some of the things that I've mentioned, and we will go in to this in detail in subsequent job search series. But at the end of the day, don't rush. Review everything, ask careful questions, and know what you're agreeing to before you do that. Thinking about, you know, what's negotiable, and this varies from group to group. Oftentimes salary is tied to your academic rank. And so coming in as an assistant professor, that's a little harder to negotiate, but that may vary from group to group. So just work to get a feel of what is negotiable when you're doing that. And then a little bit to leave you with before we go into the panel discussion in my last couple of minutes is, you know, when you accept your job and you're moving in to this early part of your career, to really begin with the end in mind and getting ahead with your career growth post-fellowship. Knowing that the first job isn't the destination, it's the beginning of a new chapter. You think of career goal, growth, and I'm taking this from another presentation that I heard, and I really like this analogy, that your career growth is kind of like chutes and ladders with an upward climb and occasional slides and turns and twists and opportunities come open, but really have that be a focus early on when you're coming in. And really your keys to early success, which you're going to be clinically confident when you come out. You're not going to be leaving fellowship to practice independently. So check. You're going to work to find the right practice fit. You're going to find a place that has a mutual commitment of yours to your growth, that's going to work to support you professionally and personally, and hopefully have strong leadership. You're going to be able to weave scholarship into whatever your practice is, because I think that's very important to show your academic worth, and think about how you do that early on to anything that you do, or whatever your joy piece or niche is, to work to integrate scholarship into anything that you're doing. And then continue to always work on your professional career development so that you can align your activities with your promotional expectations from the beginning to be on track for promotion. I wish you the best of luck. I appreciate your time. Here is my email address again. If you have any questions about this presentation or personal questions for me, I'd be happy to help in any way that I can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crabtree. As a person who's actually going into the job search, this was really helpful, and it was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me go ahead and introduce the panelists. I'm happy to introduce our esteemed panelists who are here with us to answer most of our questions, especially going through this process. So first of all, Dr. Bendel, she did her medical school in University of Minnesota, did her residency and fellowship at University of Minnesota as well. And she's currently wearing different hats as the attending neonatologist, super fellowship director, Department Vice Chair for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Thank you for being here, Dr. Bendel. And Dr. Brady, She did her medical school in Perelman School of Medicine at UPenn. She did her residency and fellowship at CHOP. And she's currently also carrying different roles as associate professor, fellowship program director, medical director at Good Samaritan NICU, and co-director for neonatal educational SIM. Next, we have Dr. Davis, who did her medical school from University of Michigan and finished her residency at UCSF and her fellowship at Boston Children and Harvard through a combined program. And she's currently Professor of Pediatrics, Fellowship Associate Program Director, Department of Pediatrics Director of Resident Research as well at University of Maryland School of Medicine. Next, we have Dr. Frost, who did her medical school in Oregon Health Sciences University, finished her residency at Hasbro Children's Hospital, did her fellowship at University of Colorado, and she's currently the Director of Fellowship Education, Director of Education for Neonatal Perinatal Medicine, Director of Recruitment for the Fellowship Program, and she has most clinical time at level 4 NICU, but also continues to work at a level 3 at CHOP. And last, we have Dr. Davis, who finished her medical school at Ohio State University. She finished her residency at Lucile Packard Children's Hospital, Stanford, and continued to do the fellowship there as well. And she is currently the medical director at Nephron NICU and associate director of neonatal services, and also district rep and chair-elect for SONPM. Thank you all for being here. And Dr. Davis had to step out, but I really appreciate her taking her time for being here in addition to all the panelists as well. So going into question and answers. Gia, do we have any questions in the chats before we go forward with our questions?
No questions yet, but feel free to submit questions through the Q&A if you have them. And if not, we have some questions that we can start with as people think.
To start off with, I can start with Dr. Brady. What's the best way to reach out or make contact with places that we would like to work?
It's a great question. I think using your resources within your fellowship program. So having conversations with your fellowship program director and other faculty in your institution who might have connections if you don't have connections at those sites. And then it's always nice, that kind of cold call of you emailing out. It's nice if that's preceded or immediately followed by an email from someone in your division that knows someone at that institution to kind of vouch for you and your kind of expertise and caliber with applying to that institution.
Got it.
There's another related question actually that just came in the Q&A about the timeline of reaching out to institutions. The question specifically is how early is too early, but I think if you guys could speak generally to sort of when to start reaching out and when institutions may expect to have information about availability.
I can take a shot at that to start if you want. I would say that in general, starting in the summer, going into your third year is a good time frame to be starting. And if you're more restrictive with your location or the number of programs, starting a little bit on the earlier side. A lot of programs also don't know then. And so if you haven't heard back from a program or they say they don't know, I think reaching back out after Labor Day into September is a good way to remind those programs that you exist and you're still interested if you haven't heard back by then.
Yeah, I
This
think
is
it
Kathy.
depends on, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Mackenzie.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think that too early, it depends on sort of what your goals are, right? Like the reality is particularly if there's a particular area that you really know you want to go back to, getting on institutions' radar early is probably a good idea. I knew a fellow once who knew she wanted to go back to a certain area that she grew up in. She reached out at the beginning of her second year. Which at the time I was like, wow, that's really early. And she ended up having a job locked in before she was done with her second year. That's incredibly unusual, but it can happen. But most programs aren't going to know what they're looking, as Jen said, they're not going to know how many people they're hiring for until later, closer to the fall of your third year. So if your goal is just for people to know you exist, it's probably never too early. But if you want concrete answers about how many people are going to hire, really that late summer, early fall is when they're actually going to know.
I agree 100% with that, Mackenzie. This is Kathy. And the other thing I would say is, in addition to if you have a really particular spot, if you have a really particular interest that is potentially only going to be for your scholarly activity or your QI, or maybe even the type of unit you want to be on, if it's really only going to be met at a few institutions, starting early is not a bad idea, because they're also looking for people who are really interested in those niche areas. And so letting them know you exist, they'll look for you at PAS then when you're giving a presentation or something. So I think if you have real strong desires either for an institution or a location, that early reach out, again, like Mackenzie said, it's not, you're never going to get a promise probably, like her one fellow, but at least you're on the radar and you may have multiple opportunities to interact with that institution prior to the actual interview process. I know a few people where that has really made a difference in their getting a very specific job they wanted.
Thank you all so much. There's another question in the chat related to the current climate and the fact that it seems like a lot of academic institutions are only hiring for clinical positions. And so the question here is whether applicants should change their approach to cover letters and reach out and sort of the communication with institutions, and whether you anticipate any differences in the job application cycle given the current climate. Very hard question to answer, but if anyone has any.
Well, I guess what I should say is you should always apply for the type of job you want to do. It ends up being frustrating for both you and the institution if you end up in a position to just get a job, but it isn't really what you wanted to do. And if you're not doing the job they hired you for because you don't want it, or so I think straddling that fence too much sometimes can end up being a problem, and it ends up being a problem with that professionalism and honesty that Dr. Crabtree was referring to. With that said, if you don't really know what you want to do, that's you're not really committed to a particular pathway because of your interests and things that you've done in fellowship, then it's a little bit of a different story. But I've seen too many people paint themselves one way in order to get the job and get in the door. And then it doesn't work out, that there's something else that opens up that's different from what they have accepted.
And I think sometimes it's hard when you're applying, because they might say there's a job open at this academic center, and until you apply, you don't know what their expectations are. Like, are they looking, are they looking for more of a faculty associate that's pure clinical? Are they looking for someone that's academic, but they don't have a lot of protected time to offer initially? So it's okay to, in your cover letter, to kind of brag about yourself. Say, I trained at this institution, we're a level this NICU, I had experience with this. So your cover letter is like a compact CV, but really bragging about all your accomplishments, because then they can see who you are. And that way you can, get an idea. Because like I said, I found a lot of times I was like, it's an academic center, but they're looking for something more clinical, or what are they looking for? So, you can always kind of do this cover letter that brags about all like your areas. This was my scholarly activity that I'm interested in. This is the QI work I did. This is the clinical training I have. So just to show what a well-rounded person you are. And then, once you find out more about the job, like Kathy was saying, maybe it's not a good fit for you. Maybe it ends up being a much better better fit than you thought, but you can't hurt bragging about yourself in your cover letter. And with that being said, make sure you keep your CV updated. I think that's what I find my fellows do a lot is when it became time to apply for jobs, they're scrambling to put their CV in. So, remind yourself, like, as you go along, whether you're first year, second year, third year, update all the talks you give, to the residents, whatnot, all of your projects you're doing. If you're giving a talk at one of the regional or national conferences, add that to your CV, because then you're not going back and scrambling, and you kind of have reminders when you're writing your cover letter of all your awesome accomplishments that you can brag about.
Yeah, that's really great advice, Natalie, because if you express who you are, again, the details will come out in the interviews. But what's hard is if you show yourself one way in your cover letter and then you show yourself differently when you interview.
I completely agree with that. The other thing I would add is that there are many different job descriptions of academic positions at academic institutions. And so I think what the question was probably more referring to is the grant protected research time for an academic faculty appointment. And those still exist, but are probably getting a little bit more difficult. But there are still true academic faculty appointments that are more clinical, but still have protected academic time that's built into that academic appointment. And those, I think, are still very readily available and to apply for, that would still in most institutions require a job talk and kind of what your focus is in terms of your vision for the future and what brings you joy. I loved that from Dr. Crabtree's talk. And then some academic institutions also have more of, we call it a staff physician model that aren't available at all academic institutions, but are more of a private practice, truly clinical model, but in an academic environment, in an academic institution. And so there's so many different job descriptions. And I think that's one of the things, if you know what you're looking for, be honest in that, in your cover letter of what you're looking for. And if you're more open to it, then sell yourself in your cover letter with what you've accomplished, but leave that open for conversations with those institutions.
And speaking of CVs and cover letters, what do jobs or the academic programs look for in the CVs?
Obviously a lot of different things. I think, again, it kind of depends on, this is all hedging on what kind of job you're looking for. So it really kind of depends on what kind of job you're looking for. If you're looking for something in academics that has some sort of scholarly time, you're definitely going to want to list your accomplishments, so that's why I always emphasize to the fellows, like, you're all doing these QI projects, you're all doing your scholarly project, submit abstracts to the regional national conferences. That's going to look really good on your CV. Write up your projects, write up your case reports. It's hard to get motivated. Kind of experiencing our third years that are leaving right now. We're like, okay, finish things up. But, you've accomplished so much that you might as well get credit for it and get that information out to other people as well, so people can kind of learn from your work. But just that, if you're interested in academics, kind of that productivity, like, what have you done to kind of show that this is your area of interest, show that you have this skill set. I always see fellowship as a time to kind of learn a new skill set, whether it's become really good at QI, whether it's clinical research, whether it's qualitative research, whether it's education, whatever kind of your scholarly niche is, to sort of use your CV, use your fellowship time to document that that's what you're passionate about. And you can't, again, you can't go wrong having an abstract. You don't have to, right? There are plenty of people that don't, and that doesn't mean you weren't successful or that you weren't working hard. But if you've got some data and you're ready, I always recommend submitting, because that always, just looks really nice in your CV.
I would say consistency in the story that you're telling, right? So what you say in your cover letter and what you say in your interview and what is in your CV should all be telling the same sort of story. So if I meet with you in an interview and you talk about how you really want to focus your career on QI, but there's nothing in your CV about QI, then I'm confused about sort of what your trajectory was and who it is that you really want to be. So you really want the CV to be supporting what you say you're looking for in your cover letter and what you say that who you want to be in your interview.
I think that's super great advice. And I think the other thing is that take advantage of your program director or a valued mentor, someone in your division that you really trust, to read your cover letter and read your CV and say, hey, you forgot, you gave this really great talk to the residents that, okay, you might think that was padding, but it was a really great talk that was at a level that should be on here or something like that. Or someone will say, oh, take that off because that's not going to really add to things or will detract. But someone that you know and trust that actually is involved in this process at the institution as well, because they can tell you how things look and how your CV is going to look to someone who might be looking at it.
No, not a panelist, but that's really great advice. I think using your program director or mentor to, as you're kind of going into this, and you're trying to develop what the story you're going to tell, can help you kind of work to craft that based on what you've done, and can kind of step back because you're in the weeds. They can kind of see the aerial view of what you've done, maybe even have some insight into the institution you're applying to, and can help you kind of tell a story about your interests. So I think that's really great advice.
I was a program director for 25 years, and it was one of my favorite things to do was to help the fellows kind of figure out how they were going to present themselves for their job interviews.
And if I may ask a follow-up question, what made you guys follow up into academic practice versus a private practice?
Well, I'll start. I loved everything about academics. I love teaching. I love the university environment. I love practicing medicine in a setting where I have learners with me all of the time. I love being involved, whether it was my own research or in the clinical trials we were doing. I mean, everything about that appealed to me. And I have a sister who went into private practice neonatology. So we came from the same gene pool, but she's very happy to just be doing it all herself. She's like, how can you stand there and watch them try to intubate that baby? So, we all are different in what we want to do. There's headaches that go along with every job. But that's what drew me, was the joy of being with learners and moving things forward in an academic sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was worried that if I went into private practice, I wouldn't stay kind of on top of the cutting edge medicine. So, and that's not necessarily the case just sort of for me, because I really enjoyed, I remember as a fellow having the residents ask me questions, and I really had to know my stuff, because in order to teach it, you have to know it well. And so I really liked working with trainees, and I liked the kind of group feel of the faculty. We have our faculty meetings, and we have our journal clubs, and we have our quality improvement meetings, and where we get together and discuss and kind of have this collegial group and keep each other on our toes and bring the new information. So I really liked that kind of group learning environment that I felt you had in the academic faculty. And then, again, just the ability to kind of explore what your scholarly interest is. I was interested in clinical research. I did a master's in clinical investigation. So I'm a statistician. So I love doing statistics and helping people and working through projects and mentoring fellows. And so, I didn't mind that when some people, you do your shift, you go home. I didn't mind that I went, did my shift, came home, worked on this, have a random Tuesday free to kind of, work on this project or do some teaching. I also was worried I would get more burnt out if I was just clinical. because I like the clinical work, but it's hard, right? It's tiring. And so I kind of liked that I'm on service for 2 weeks and then I'm not on service for a while and I've got some med student lectures. And by the time I don't want to talk to the med students anymore, then I've got do some of my research stuff. And then by the time that's my mind's going insane with that, I'm back on service. So it's just, every day is kind of different. And I can't say that that's not the case in private practice, but I found that to be very true in academics is you can kind of build your schedule to some extent. It's relatively, lenient-ish as long as you get your stuff done. But I think you just have so many opportunities to your day's different every single day, which some people found very stressful, but I love that.
Natalie, I completely agree. I mean, I think if my number one answer would be learners and medical education, that's my passion. And so going into academics, that's what drew me. But I love having the different buckets and hats that you wear within academic medicine. And I kind of call it productive procrastination. Like if there's one thing that like I feel a little burnt out on, I switch to this other role and then I'm really productive in that. And then I switch back. And so I love that balance between those different things.
It's so funny. I feel exactly the same way. I feel like it helps keep everything fresh. So that I love when I'm taking care of patients. I love the things that I get to do in med ed, but I get to sort of move back and forth between the spheres, and then everything I don't lose my joy in all those things that I love because I don't really take any of it for granted because I'm not doing all of it all the time. And I really love that. I have to say, not that this was something that I thought about when I chose the field, but now, in retrospect, I also really love the flexibility. So, I'm a parent, I have 2 kids. I can think about when do I need to be present with their things. I have the flexibility to arrange my schedule to do that. As long as, I think, as Natalie said, as long as I'm getting my other stuff done, like I'm able to do that in ways that have been really wonderful for my family. And I appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I'll say, because I was private practice for the first 2 years out of fellowship, and then transitioned back into academics because of a location preference, and my groups were going to be integrating here in Louisville, and I knew I wanted to be back in academics, but it gave me a chance to kind of see that side of things. And there are benefits to both based on, what was just said about your personality type, sometimes salary based. And so, but what I love now, again, is what Dr. Frost said and Dr. Brady, is that flexibility. And then obviously I talked a lot about the joy when I've had a bad clinical outcome, when I've had a really, really long week of service, I can just shift and pivot and immerse myself in another one of my buckets. And that just kind of fills me back up to the top again. And then I can continue to do this. And in my, at private practice, I was a 1.0 and was working somewhere around 2,400 hours a year. And I was tired. The bonus was when I was not at work, I was not at work, so it's your personality and how you kind of navigate that. But I love the flexibility of academics.
Thank you all so much for those reflections. There was another question that came up in the Q&A. This is going back to the discussion of reaching out to division chiefs. This question is, what happens if you have that first phone call conversation with the division director and you realize that it is not a good fit? If they offer you an in-person interview, how do you navigate that without burning bridges, but also not wasting your time or their time?
I can take a stab at that.
Oh, perfect.
I would just say I would be honest in a professional way. So I don't think programs do not want to waste their time, energy, resources, and finances to have you come out and interview in person in their division if you're truly not interested. So if you're not interested, I would not go for an in-person interview. But depending on why you felt it wasn't a good fit, you might want to sugarcoat that a little bit. And it might be that you decided geographically that wasn't the right location, right? Because in the future, maybe that changes and maybe you are interested in that program. So you want to be very professional with the reason why. But I would be honest and not go to an in-person interview if you know you're absolutely not interested.
And to follow up on that, I agree completely with what you said, Jen. And it's actually less professional and more likely to burn a bridge if you go and do the interview and waste their time and money bringing you out. And so giving an appropriate excuse or reason still leaves it open. And as Jen said, if it's something like geography, well, that can always change with time. But you're more likely to burn a bridge. You know, it's not like a fellowship Zoom interview where you can do one extra one and you've wasted a few hours. And it's usually a group interview anyway. So having one more person on the list that day didn't make a huge difference. So
And following in that lines, do you have any phrases that we can use to politely let them know that we are scouting other places too, in addition to them, or if we are not interested?
Yeah, I think every place knows that you're looking around, right? They might be the place you're the most interested in, but it's a job, you know, it's a career, but it's also a job. So everyone knows you're looking for a different job. So it's okay to say you're looking in a certain area. And like, I'll use my state of Maryland, for example, like say you're like, hey, my family's in Maryland. I'm looking for an academic position in Maryland. And you know, they're going to expect that. And it's, you know, it's just kind of it's a small world. So they know all the places you're going to be looking at, and that's completely okay. If you kind of like send a cover letter, talk to the division head and decide it's not a great fit for you, you know, that's okay. You can still kind of apply to other places, but you can definitely say, you know, oh, thank you so much for your time. You know, it doesn't seem like this will be a good fit because I'm looking more for this. And it seems like what this position is this, but thank you, you know, thank you so much. Like, again, just be polite and honest and not, you know, no one's going to insult anyone, but not be like, ah, this sucks. You know, you're like, hey, these are the reasons why. But I think, you know, you don't have to be secretive. Everybody, it's a job, right? Everyone knows you're applying at different places. They might even ask where. You're not supposed to ask where people are applying during fellowship and training, but they, you know, they might be like, oh, where are you looking? And you're like, oh, I'm kind of looking different academic. You can kind of be as specific or vague as you want, but it's not, you don't have to be, it's not a secret. You don't have to be hidden. And you're also looking, you know, they want someone that wants to be there because they don't want someone that starts and hates it and leaves because it's so much investment and time in starting new faculty. They want someone that's going to come and be happy and be a good fit for their program too. So if you're like, hey, this isn't quite what I'm looking for, that's okay. They kind of want to know that, you know, you're doing it politely, but they want to know that as well because they want a person that's going to hopefully stay and be there for years and kind of help build their program.
There's a question in the Q&A that's somewhat related to this about navigating having an offer from one program while still interviewing at other locations, and basically about navigating timelines and asking for extensions while still considering multiple options.
This is the time when people start to miss the match. You never thought you'd miss the match until this happens, where where you're applying and there's like 3 programs you're applying. I'm just making up numbers, but there's 3 programs you're applying to. There's one you think is going to be your favorite, but that's your last interview. And you interview at the first place and they like later in that day or a week later make you an offer. It's a very stressful situation and it takes a lot of finesse, but I think it's very appropriate to say, thank you so much. I really, you know, if you didn't like it, don't say you did. But if you did like it, you're like, hey, thank you so much. I really like this. I have 2 more interviews that are going to be in the next 2 weeks that I'd really like to compare because those are also good locations for my family. So can I get back to you after that? Or, you know, so you don't want to lie and say, oh, yes, this would be great. I just need a week to think about it. And you know, string them along. But I think you can, you know, they understand too. I've had programs that say, hey, we need to know in a week. And then you kind of have to make a decision, you know, is this an opportunity that you don't want to miss out and they're going to not offer you in a week, or is the other program kind of worth the wait? Usually they don't, you know, usually there's a timeline, but every once in a while some places will kind of put some pressure on you. And that's where it's kind of getting to what your goals are and what programs, you know, but trying to get your interviews to be sort of close together. Because if you have one interview and one 4 months later, the first program is probably not going to wait 4 months for you to say yes. But if you kind of keep them in a tight time frame, then if you've interviewed within a couple weeks, if the first program offers you, they're very really going to be like, oh, you need to let me know tomorrow. If they do, that's very shady. But if they're like, hey, we need to know in a couple weeks or in a month, if you've been able to fit all your other interviews, then you can compare.
Yeah, I was
I
going to say
would-
this thing about the timing, right? And it's really challenging when you are a fellow and you only have certain windows of times that you can interview. I think most programs, again, they know you're interviewing other places. And so asking for a couple of weeks, I would be surprised if anyone said no. I agree. If they're like, no, we need an answer in 24 hours, that's probably a red flag.
Yeah,
but
exactly what I was going to say.
right? Like that's a problem. But it is hard to ask them to wait 3 or 4 months too, right? Because they also need to fill the position. And so you may be put into a situation where you are going to have to make a choice, and that's really challenging. But I think most programs recognize that you have a schedule that is challenging and know that you're going to be interviewing in multiple places and are going to want to work with you if they really want to hire you. But there are limits, I think, is the reality.
Right. And I agree completely with what you both said. And, academic institutions are where you're living right now for the most part. And so they know what a fellow life is like. They know it's going to take a little time. They're usually on a hiring timeline that is at the end of fellowship, a summertime or a fall start. So if you're interviewing with them early, it's not like they need to make a snap decision like a private practice group that just lost somebody and they're all working extra hours and want to fill a job as soon as possible. But they're not going to wait forever. So everybody should be understanding of an appropriate request to complete your other interviews, weigh your options, talk with your partner, whatever, all the things that we know you need to do. And if they really want you, they'll be very willing to do that. And if they're not, then it makes you think about whether this is the place you want to be.
I think the one situation where I've seen some fellows run into more of an issue with timelines is if they're applying to both academic and private positions, which they're absolutely fellows who don't know yet. And then that's a reason to explore both. But the timelines often are a little bit different for both, and private practice tends to give shorter deadlines of when they want an answer by. And so that can be tricky to navigate. Whereas academic institutions, after you interview, a lot of times there's a process before they can give you an offer, and it can take many weeks after your interview to receive that offer. Private practice tends to be a lot quicker with what I've seen with our fellows. And so you might want to be a little bit more strategic if you are applying in both, not doing the first date that a private practice offers you an interview and trying to push that interview timeline a little bit further out so that you hopefully run into less conflicts with that.
The other thing that can get tricky is if you are a 2-physician household. So my husband is also a pediatric subspecialist, and one of our times going through the job search, I had an offer. They said, we need you to sign your letter of intent in a week. And I'm like, my husband hasn't even gotten an offer yet, right? I'm not going to sign something if I don't even know that he has a job. And they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm like, yeah. So sometimes there are some other, extenuating circumstances and everyone was very reasonable, but I had to point out that it was not realistic to ask me to sign anything quite yet. And so some of those things can make it challenging too.
We are running up against the end of this session. There is one last question in the chat that if people have 2 minutes, maybe we can quickly address, which is just related to the number of programs or institutions that people are recommended to apply to. This person mentions that Dr. Crabtree talked about considering a tiered approach, but they're wondering how many programs is too few versus too many.
That's a great question, but a tough question. I guess it kind of depends. Like, I had no geographic limitation. I was ready to explore any part of the country. That being said, San Francisco is geographically the furthest south I'd ever lived. So Baltimore is the deep south to me. Which it's going to make many of you people laugh. So I was kind of open to wherever. So I reached out to programs that had, interests like me, or I definitely leaned on my program director and my attendings to say, hey, reach out to this person, reach out to that person. So I think I reached out to like 5 or 6 different academic institutions. I don't know if there's a set number. I think it's kind of like when you're going through fellowship and residency, it's sort of, are you more open to wherever and going to a place that might be a good fit in a new area, or do you need to be in Atlanta? So if you need to be in a certain area for yourself, for your family, you're going to kind of reach all the programs in that area and sort of see who bites. I'm curious to see if other people, it was tough for me to pick a number.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a magic number. I'm thinking back to, there have been times when I've been looking at a very particular geographic area. And so I reached out to all of the academic institutions within a reasonable driving distance. And so, like, whatever that number might be for wherever you may be going. And in my head, if nothing there worked out, then I was going to do a second wave. So to that tiered question of, okay, then I'll see what private practice jobs there are. And sort of like prioritizing, if I had I got all the things on my wish list, I'm going to like sort of look for that job first. But, then it very much, the number depended sort of on what my boundaries were. There have been other times where we had no geographic constraints, but then we were looking for jobs for 2 people with, so I think it very much depends on what your goals are. So is it that you want a certain type of job? Is it that you want a certain area? Is it that you are looking for a certain kind of salary? I mean, there are all those things that we think about when we're sort of prioritizing. And then when you put that wish list together, how many places do you need to then apply to feel confident that you're going to get offers, that are going to check off your wish list? So sorry, I can't just say 5, right? Like that, but.
I also think it's important to keep in mind that the places you're applying might not have jobs at that time either. And so that factors into it as well. So you might have a list of 10 places that you're interested in, but maybe only 5 or 6 of them are hiring at that time. So that's another factor that you need to keep in mind too. But I think these questions are very individualized to what specific job you're looking for, geographic location, things that have already been mentioned. And so meeting with your program director or your division director and using the resources within your current institution to help you refine that list and come up with that first tier can be incredibly helpful. And whether you're interested or not interested in staying at a job at your current institution, like, your institution helped train you and they should be happy to help you find the perfect job for you, whether it's at their institution or somewhere else. So I would not hesitate to use your resources and be open with your current institution so they can help you with these individualized approaches.
It doesn't hurt to reach out. I think that's the thing. Worst case scenario, they don't have a job. Worst case scenario, they don't write you back. Oh, well, so if you reach out and they write back and they're like, they don't have a job, especially if you reach out and your program director, it's such a small world. Your program director was a co-resident with their program director, so you can kind of use your resources, which we've said we sound like broken records, but it's so true. You're not alone in this. But I think it doesn't, there are definitely places that I reached out to and they never wrote me back. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And if you reach out to a place, you weren't sure, but it's in the area that would work for you, and you hear back from them and you find out more and it's not quite what you're looking for, that's okay to say, thank you so much. I'm still looking at different areas. This is kind of one of my, it seems like this is more of a clinical position. I was looking more for this, or vice versa, just politely, but at least you can hear more about what's available. And sometimes you reach out and they're like, we don't have anything right now. And then 2 months, a week, 2 months, whatever later, one of the faculty ends up leaving. And so they're like, oh, now we have something. So if you put feelers out there and say, I'm interested in this area, and I usually say why you're interested in that program. So tailor your cover letter or your email. Don't send a generic one to every single, be like, hi, I'm really interested in your program because I'm interested in the medical education and I wanted to get a master's in medical education, or I want to be involved in the SIM program. And I was interested in, these are some of the faculty that I saw on your website were doing amazing work in this. And, you can kind of, prove that you looked up the program, that you're interested and why you might be interested. You could be interested in different programs and kind of tailor it to some extent, but then, you at least get on their radar. And if something comes up, they would reach out to you.
Right. And this is going to sound really I don't know, might sound silly, but go out there and have fun with this. I mean, this is an amazing part of time in your life. You're well trained. You know, there are jobs out there. This is a wonderful career, but getting the right place, the right job, and even if the first one isn't right, I've never had a fellow that didn't like their first job, even if they didn't stay there ultimately. You know, getting out there and doing it. But my husband always says, shouldn't be so anxiety provoking. There will be something. So enjoy it. Take advantage of learning about these different places and really find what place is, you know, in the interview process gives you joy and makes you think you want to be there.
Well, thank you all so much. This was an incredible session, an incredible didactic, and also I think some really great advice shared in the second portion. So as we mentioned at the beginning, the recording will be available on YouTube for those who were here today, as well as for those who weren't able to make it to reference later. So thank you all again and have a good day, everyone.